This customer ordered an Arizona Diamondbacks hat cake. I have made several of these before, but this is the first time that somebody orders that purple throwback Diamondbacks design. And I always love making cakes that have bright colors on there, so I was really happy to make this one. The customer did request red velvet cake flavor, so I started out with two 3-inch tall 9-inch cake layers, and then I slowly carved this dome shape to the top of the cake. I did have to use some of those leftover scraps that I had carved off, and I placed those right at the top of the cake to create more of a dome shape. I then creme coated this cake and placed in the freezer for about 20 minutes. Once I took it out, I put my final coat of buttercream frosting, and then using my spatula, I just worked on smoothing that frosting as much as possible. I am going to cover this in fondant, so you always want to make sure that you leave a really smooth base before covering in fondant. I then made this large batch of fondant, and then I colored it using Americolor's Regal Purple. I rolled it out and then placed over the cake. I did have a lot of leftover fondant hanging off the side, so I made sure to cut that so it doesn't stretch the fondant more than it should. After this, I just used my hands to smooth out the fondant against that buttercream as much as possible. The hardest part for me when learning how to cover a cake in fondant was definitely how to get rid of all of those wrinkles at the bottom of the cake. After many years of trial and error and just so much practice, I learned that the easiest way is not with this fondant smoother tool, but to actually use your hands, and one of your hands is going to be pulling the fondant out while your other hand is smoothing the fondant against that buttercream. I always do this as much as possible before getting that fondant scraper tool, because now that the fondant is laying flat against the cake, you can now use that scraper tool and it really helps. One of the reasons you have to have a really smooth buttercream base under the fondant is because once you start pushing that fondant down against the cake, you can really see any imperfections in that buttercream if there are any. Once I'm happy with how the fondant looks, I grab my fondant roller and I cut off all of the extra fondant. And this roller's not going to get a really close cut, so then I end up grabbing a knife and I just cut really close to the cake as much as possible without revealing any of the buttercream or cake underneath. Once I'm done cutting all of that fondant off, I grab this fondant tool and I begin creating these lines, which usually you see on a hat, and they're also going to be my guide so that I know where to work. Once I'm done making all these lines, I grab my second fondant tool, which is really cool because it's kind of like a pinwheel, and once you roll that against the fondant, it creates this stitched look. So I begin creating these stitching impressions right on the side of each one of those lines that I just finished making. And now the base of my hat is all finished. Next, I printed that Diamondbacks logo on an edible image and then placed over some purple fondant. I made sure not only to print the Diamondbacks logo, but to get one that looked like it was stitched. Next, I print that World Series 2001 patch and place that on the side of the hat. And then I grab that same stitching pinwheel tool and create that design that you always see on the lid of a hat. Then I print one more edible image, which is that gold 5950 sticker that you see on hats. Next, I rolled out some of that leftover purple fondant. I cut out a small circle and placed right on top of the hat. Then using a small brush, I placed some clear piping gel to each section of the top of the hat. And then I placed some of these really small fondant circles that I cut out. And last, the customer did request for me to pipe Happy 35th Birthday Diego, but she wanted the 35 done in Roman numerals. So I thought it would be really cool, instead of piping that onto the board, if I pipe that on the side of the hat so it looked like custom stitching. And now the cake is all done for me to put in my lightbox and take some pictures. The customer did reach out to me the following day with this message. I hope you guys like this one.